Good afternoon and welcome to today's broadcast. My name is Orlo K. Steele, and for 35 years, between 1955 and 1990, I was a serving officer in the United States Marine Corps. In December of this year, historians and others will be commemorating a brief but very significant battlefield that took place in the Pacific some 70 years ago in December of 1941. Although brief, it was an example of great courage and gallantry by the defenders at Wake Island. Here to tell us about that story is one of the defenders of Wake Island. He is a long-standing friend of mine, a fellow citizen here in Grass Valley, and a person who I have always held in great admiration. Our viewing audiences for this particular broadcast are really two. First, our citizens here who follow Nevada County Television, where this will be aired. And secondly, also for the staff of the Historical Division at Headquarters Marine Corps, located at Quantico, Virginia. The Historical Division is at Quantico, and this will be added to their archives for future historians and researchers on World War II battles. And now it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our guest, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Harrison, United States Marine Corps, retired. And Charlie, it's great to have you with us here today.
Well, it's an honor to be with you, Orlo. I value you highly as my good friend.
Well, I can tell you that I feel equally about that. Charlie, before we get into the battle or how you were a participant at Wake Island, tell me about your early life, where you were raised, and what you did before you enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Well, I was born and raised near Tulsa, Oklahoma, and very uneventful up until at least graduation from high school. Then I became a lifeguard at a local popular freshwater lake during the summers. And other than that, it was pretty uneventful.
How did you happen to select the Marine Corps, to enlist in the Marine Corps, if you could have had options to go into other services?
Well, a good number of the professional wrestlers that appeared in my hometown came to the lake where I worked in the summer for their suntans and so forth. A number of them were former active duty Marines, and I loved to listen to their tales and was quite intrigued by it, and I think that had a great influence on my decision to enlist in the Corps myself.
You talk about being out and stationed in places like China and Nicaragua and Haiti and those places.
Oh yeah, they had some very interesting tales.
So you decided to enlist, and where did you enlist?
At that time, I was living in the state of Oklahoma, and there was no recruiting station or any Marine facility within that state where you could enlist. So I had to go to Texas, Dallas, Texas. And I remember that date quite well. It was September 19th. And it was in, I was trying to remember the name of the building, but in any event, I had to go to Texas to enlist, which I did.
And that was in 1939, was it?
September 1939.
Okay. And from there, did you then train for your recruit training, which was out in California, I believe, right?
Yes, at San Diego. I think at the time the country was divided into a couple of recruiting sections. I believe the Mississippi River was a dividing line. Everybody enlisting to the east of the Mississippi, went to Parris Island, South Carolina, for recruit training, and those of us enlisting to the west of the Mississippi went to San Diego.
And you went by train, is that right?
Yes.
How many days did it take you, do you recall?
As I remember, it was 3 days, and it was a pretty lousy type train. I had no way to close the windows, and of course we're crossing a lot of desert country, so we had a lot of dust and dirt and very hot. But anyway, we eventually, after 3 days or so, we arrived in San Diego and were met by a big, mean-looking Marine sergeant.
At the train station there in San Diego?
At the train station, and gave us a pretty good idea that we're in for a rough time here, you know.
Were you traveling with other recruits?
Yes, there were several others. I can't remember just how many, but less than a dozen, as I recall.
So then you got your first glimpse of San Diego, the Marine Corps recruit depot in San
Yes,
Diego.
right.
Where were you billeted at that time?
Oh, in tents, as I recall. No, that's not right. There were several old metal-type barracks. One of them was for sea school. And we, as in the 15th Marines, occupied another one of them.
Well, at the time that you came in the Marine Corps, the strength of the Marine Corps was about 19,500 troops total.
That certainly sounds
They used to make
right.
the statement that the Marine Corps was even smaller than the New York Police Department, I believe.
That's right.
How big was your recruit platoon? Was it, do you recall?
Oh, I think it was 36 people. I'm not certain of that.
Okay. And then after you graduated from recruit training, you went into the 15th Regiment?
Yes, right.
Okay. And I believe it was the 15th Regiment, the 2nd Battalion of the 15th Regiment, was the nucleus of what became the 1st Defense Battalion.
Yes, that's
Is that
true.
right? Can we see, I think about that time, Charlie, you may have had this picture taken that we would like to take a look at. Can we see that first slide, please? How old were you then, Charlie? Were you about
18.
18. And a private in the
Yes.
United States Marine Corps. It looks like you fired sharpshooter there.
Just a skinny little guy.
So then you became a member of the 1st Defense Battalion.
Yes, true.
And we need to talk a little bit about that Defense Battalion. Defense battalions were conceived by Major General Commandant Holcomb, Thomas Holcomb,
Yes.
who in 1939 saw that as a means to be able to raise the strength of the Marine Corps by building these defense battalions that were part of the war plans for the Pacific, in which they envisioned a number of outposts
Yes.
going out into the Pacific.
General Holcomb was very impressive.
Yeah.
Made a big impression on me.
And he chose his words when he named you the defense battalion very, very carefully because of the the isolationism that existed in the United States at the time. They wouldn't get any money for anything that sounded offense. But if you called it defense, why then they could do it, and it became a masterstroke. He was able
Yes,
to
he was very intelligent.
create at
man.
least within the first couple of years 5 of those different battalions. But you were in the first one. And those defense battalions were specially tailored to be able to provide some sort of static defense for some of these island outposts.
Right.
Its main weapons were the old 5-inch 51
Right.
Coast Artillery people. Can we see that next slide to see an example of that along with this rangefinder? These weapons had generally been salvaged off of the cruisers and battleships that had been decommissioned in the 1920s. They were part of the Second Armament and were in storage someplace. And that the defense battalion was to have 3 two-gun batteries of these 5-inch 31s, which indeed they had.
They were very effective.
They could shoot about a 50-pound shell out to about 17,000 yards, I think.
Right. I had the pleasure of seeing one of them sink a Japanese ship. The shell hit the ship amidships, must have been near the magazine or on the magazine, because the ship blew up and actually broke in half and lifted those two halves clear out of the water.
And we're going to be talking about what you witnessed at just a little bit later on in the next segment. Also, you had an air defense capability, and if we can see the next slide on that, that was the old World War I M3 anti-aircraft battery. You see here, boy, that looks like a real beast, Charlie. I think it was 6 tons, I read, and it had, you moved it by either a tractor or an old Rio truck, and it
spent many hours learning to set it up. You know, it was folded up in mobile on wheels, and for training we drug it into place, and then see how effectively and quickly we could go ahead and set it up.
Go into action, right?
Yes, ready.
I understand a well-trained crew could get off anywhere from 22 to 25 rounds in a minute.
That's exactly what I remember.
And it had a range, you could go up to almost 28,000 feet, but on wake you were limited because of your fusing to about 21 or 18,000,
yes.
something like that.
Yes.
Now, other batteries that were included in the Defense Battalion, there was a 50 caliber battery of mounted anti-aircraft guns. And then you also had, for ground defense, 30 caliber machine gun battery, and then there was a searchlight battery. Altogether about 900 men in the battalion. Tell us about where you trained while you were there at San Diego.
Out on the tip of Point Loma seemed to be a pretty ideal place. We could do live fire out there, and the Navy could provide tow aircraft for airborne targets, and it worked out very well.
Most of that training was under some NCOs. Do you remember how the quality was with those non-commissioned officers?
Oh, they were great. They were great. Some of them, I can remember at least 2 who were Marine Corps legends even today. Big McKinstry.
Well, we have a slide of Gunnery Sergeant McKinstry, if we can have that slide on. Does he look as rough and tumble as...
That's him. Yeah, he's a great guy.
What was he also known for? You had told me privately before.
Oh, he had been used as a model for Ingram shaving cream.
Oh, really?
Years ago. That seemed to stick with him all through. He was a great guy.
But he had been trained on those anti-aircraft.
Very much so.
And also, you told me you had Gunnery Sergeant Holmes.
Charlie Holmes, yes.
We have that slide of Charlie Holmes, please.
Charlie was a very fine NCO, staff NCO. There were a great bunch of people there.
You know, that's a picture of him as a staff sergeant. I think it was probably taken in Honolulu or someplace when you were there.
Oh, either there or Quantico, Virginia. He spent some time there.
Yep. Well, you continued to train for almost about 14 months in the San Diego, and then in March of 1941, you embarked aboard a ship. Do you remember the name of that ship?
Regulus.
No, this is from San Diego. It was the USS Enterprise, the carrier Enterprise.
Oh, yes, of course.
And the Enterprise took you to, or your battalion, at least most of it, I think, moved out to Hawaii. And there near Pearl Harbor, I think you disembarked, and they set the battalion up on the parade ground there in front of the old Marine barracks
Yes, I remember
at
that.
Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And there you continued training. You put, I think, out at Nanakuli, you told me, was one of your
Yes,
ranges.
Nanakuli Beach, on western part of Oahu.
Could you still do live fire out there and everything?
Yes, at that time you could.
So by this time, your battalion had been together almost a year and a half when you were out in Hawaii, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You must have been had that training down pretty well.
Yes, we had a great bunch of NCOs, staff NCOs. It was a good, what I would say is a good outfit.
Mm-hmm. Now that must have been a very busy time in Hawaii. I don't know if you were kind of aware of that, but of course the Army was up at the Schofield Barracks area, and they were being brought up to full strength. The U.S. Pacific Fleet was, of course, stationed there with its both carriers and battleship fleet. And at the same time, they were beginning to bring in other defense battalions.
Yes.
And at that particular time, Admiral Kimmel, who was the flag officer as the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, was very, very anxious to get things moving because tensions between Japan and the United States had become very, very strained.
Yes, he was one of those that realized the gravity of the situation.
Yes. And as a part of that, appropriations had been made in 1940 to start building a number of advanced airfields out on some of the outlying islands.
I remember that.
And that would become kind of an advance warning for the fleet in the case of any war or hostilities, and also be jumping off places if the fleet took the offensive against Japan. And that was in the war plans they were doing. And they were looking to establish these all the way from Adak and the Aleutians down to Midway to Wake Island, Palmyra, Johnson, and into the Samoa, where generally was the plan at that particular time. And in that connection, there had been a number of construction outfits who were building these airfields. And Morris and Knutson had won the contract for Wake Island of, I think, $13 million. They had arrived in January on Wake Island and started constructing an advanced naval air station and taking out that lagoon and everything else so that they could land the Navy's patrol boats, the PBYs. Right. And about that time, Kimmel got authority to start manning a Marine ground force onto Wake Island. And part of your battalion was scattered around Palmyra and Johnston.
That's true.
And about 170 of you embarked on the 7th of August, I think it was, on the USS Regulus. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that.
There at Pearl Harbor, along with some 45 construction workers and some others. Because the 1st Defense Battalion didn't have a field grade officer, your commanding officer was a Major Hahn, who was really from the 6th Defense Battalion.
Yes, I remember him.
And you set sail for Wake Island. On the.
We had no idea where we were going at the time.
I was going to ask you, did you? I mean, at what point in time did they tell you about Wake, and what were you visualizing Wake would be like?
We must have had somebody who had been there, because I remember listening to a description of the Goonie birds and the scavioli brush and so forth. It was pretty accurate. Of course, that would apply to Midway also, so really.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to the next slide, which is a picture of Admiral Kimmel and his staff, looking over a map of the Pacific, and then jump to the next slide. And here is a map of the Pacific, and I'm not able to point it out to you, but if the viewers would look at that table on the right-hand side on the insert, they will see that Wake Island sits out to the west of Honolulu by almost a little bit more than 2,000 miles. And then Midway is up to the north. Palmyra and Johnston can also be viewed. And of course, you're very, very close to the Japanese mandated islands, which were the Carolinas and in the Marshall Islands. We're only about 600 to 800 miles away from Wake.
Yes.
So you were a good long ways. You were known then on the Regulus as the Pioneer Detachment.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I think it took you about 9 or 10 days to get out to Wake Island.
It was quite a time, yes.
I think our records show that it was the 19th of August, I think, when you eventually did.
That Regulus was no speedboat.
It was a Navy supply ship. Can we see the next slide, please? And there is a picture of Wake Island.
Oh, yes.
And what I'd really like to point out is that actually Wake is made up of 3 atolls.
3 islands.
There is Wake, which is to the right of your screen, which is the V, and then there are 2 smaller atolls. The one to the south or to the left of the screen was Wilkes Island, and the one to the north was Peel Island. So there really is the 3 islands that make that up. Can I see, I'd like to just for a minute turn also to this other sketch map and point out that Wake, divided by 2 inlets, around here is Wake, Wilkes, and then Peel is up here to the north. You can do that. And may I see the next slide, please? Charlie, this is a view that might have been your first view of Wake Island. It's really taken from a tender, but anchored off where you offloaded your supplies when you started going. And so Major Hahn took 70 men ashore with him, along with Dr. Can, your surgeon, while Lieutenant or Captain Platt was given charge of offloading the ship. And which group were you in?
I was with Colonel Hahn, as I recall.
You went ashore?
This had been a long time ago.
But it took 3 days to offload all of your equipment and your weapons and your guns.
Yeah, we had to
and it
lay
had
off.
to be done by small lighters and small boats that went into the
channel. There was a channel.
Right. And when you stepped ashore, what did you think? What was the island? Describe it for us as your memory kind of holds it.
Very barren, and the weather was quite warm.
Yeah, the average temperatures are about 89 degrees. I believe. Vegetation, I think the highest is over on Peel, that's 22 feet. But the mean of the island is about 12 feet, I think, throughout.
That sounds right.
Yeah. And it's, as you say, scavioli trees, some ironwoods, and other vegetation, but they didn't go much higher than 10 or 12 or maybe 20 feet at the most back in here.
Pretty lonely place.
And you first went in, if I can again turn to this, and you set up in what they all called Camp 1.
Yes.
And this was the camp that the Morrison Knudsen construction people had. You set your tents up on those hard stands that they had while they had moved over to Camp 2 over here.
That's right.
That's in there. And in those first 3 days, we're going to bring this part of our story to kind of a close, Charlie, but those first 3 days, you're going to be, I guess, setting up housekeeping in order to be able to have a tent camp there, and then Major Hahn is going to set you to the task of employing the guns on various parts of the island.
Right.
Right. But we're going to save that for the next segment, Charlie, when we, if you would kind of draw your attention. Do you have any closing remarks about what it was like? How were you uniformed at the time? Pith helmets?
You know, this has been a long time ago. I believe we did have been issued the pith helmet, so thank God we had.
Right.
Because it was very sunny and uncomfortably sunny and warm.
Mm-hmm. What were your rations like on those first few days when they got a mess hall set up?
You know, I can't recall that. I don't think it was anything out of the ordinary, though, or I would remember it.
Okay.
We
Well-
never were provided with real feast, but it was good, solid Marine Corps food.
Good. Well, we're coming to the close of our time for this first segment, Charlie. We thank you very much for being with us this
My
afternoon.
pleasure.
And I look forward to renewing this discussion with you the next time we meet here at Nevada County TV.
Real fine. I hope my memory serves me a little
Your memory
better.
is doing fine. You are now 89 years old, right?
Yes.
You
I'll
will be 90 next March, I think you said. Mm-hmm. Well, it's great to have you with us, Charlie. Thank you.
Debbie says, come next grass.
Okay. We'll just say goodbye to our audience with that.
Down. Good show.
Think it went all right?
Looks great. Very good. Very, very good.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Obamacare